My name is Loretta. I am 62 years old, and my occupation is a retired high school principal. For 40 years, I poured my absolute heart and soul into shaping the minds of inner-city youth. My late husband Calvin and I worked our fingers to the bone. We picked up extra shifts, skipped vacations, and wore our shoes until the soles wore out all to make sure our two children, Jamal and Tasha, graduated from college, completely debt-free. Together, Calvin and I built a beautiful, fully paid-off home in a neighborhood that nobody wanted back then. Today, that same street is highly sought after and completely gentrified. We built our sanctuary with deep love and unwavering faith, expecting it to be the warm heart of our family for generations to come. I spent 3 days cooking a massive holiday feast, only to sit at my own dining table while my grown children treated me like invisible help. They were so busy whispering about their future inheritance and calculating the value of my property that they completely failed to notice I was already packing my bags. They thought they had my entire future figured out. They haven't even met the new owners. The sudden shift from a mother's boundless love to the icy, bitter realization of family betrayal is a pain I would not wish on my worst enemy. For years, I looked at Jamal, who grew up to be a highly paid finance executive, and Tasha, an ambitious junior real estate agent with nothing but overwhelming pride. I truly believed I had raised two strong, respectful adults. But after Calvin passed away 3 years ago, the warmth in our family died right along with him. The respectful children I raised vanished overnight. They were replaced by greedy strangers who only saw my home as a giant dollar sign. Their visits became rare, only happening when they needed a quick loan or a favor they never intended to repay. And when they brought their spouses into my home, the disrespect reached a level I could no longer ignore. Jamal married Chloe, a condescending interior designer, who looked at my cherished family heirlooms with absolute disgust. Tasha married Bradley, an opportunistic tech bro who practically salivated over the rising property values in my neighborhood. They thought I was just a tired, oblivious old widow they could easily push aside. They were dead wrong. Calvin and I started with absolutely nothing but a shared vision and a whole lot of faith. We worked ourselves to the bone to build a solid foundation for our family. He worked long, exhausting hours at the Municipal Transit Authority, while I spent my days dealing with tight budgets, difficult parents, and troubled teenagers as a high school principal. We took on every extra shift and summer school session we could find. For 20 years, Calvin and I never took a single real vacation. We did not know what it felt like to lay on a sandy beach or sleep in a luxury hotel. I wore the same 3 sensible suits to work every week, and I walked the school hallways in shoes that had been resoled so many times the local cobbler knew me by my first name. We did all of this for one single reason. We wanted Jamal and Tasha to start their adult lives completely free of the financial chains that hold so many of our people back. Every single extra dollar we made went straight into their college funds. We bought our home in a neighborhood that nobody wanted back then. We spent our weekends patching the roof, painting the walls, and planting the front garden. It was a labor of absolute love. We paid off the mortgage 5 years early, just to make sure Jamal and Tasha would never have to worry about us being a financial burden. I poured my sweat into those floorboards so my children could walk on solid ground. We wanted them to fly, and they certainly did. Jamal is now a high-powered finance executive. He walks into corporate boardrooms wearing custom-tailored suits that cost more than my first car. Tasha found her own path as a junior real estate agent, driving a luxury sport utility vehicle to show million-dollar homes to wealthy clients. For a while, my heart swelled with immense pride every time I looked at them. I felt that all those missed dinners and exhausted nights had been worth it. When Jamal got his big promotion, Calvin and I cried tears of joy right there in the living room. When Tasha sold her first house, we threw a huge backyard barbecue to celebrate her hard work. But looking back, I realized that the more successful they became, the more they began to resent the very dirt we stood on to lift them up. Chloe and Bradley were the loud catalysts, but the entitlement was already brewing silently in my children. My pride started to crack when they brought their chosen partners into our lives. Jamal married Chloe. She is a white woman who works as a high-end interior designer, and she possesses a level of condescension that can chill a room the second she walks in. She looks at people as if they are broken projects that need fixing, specifically me. Tasha married Bradley, a white tech bro with shifty eyes and a fake smile plastered constantly across his face. He speaks exclusively in fast-paced buzzwords about startups and maximizing asset potential. He has the kind of sneaky opportunism that makes your skin crawl, always looking for a way to get ahead, using someone else's resources. Calvin and I welcomed them both with open arms and a table full of food, hoping that the love we showed them would reflect back on our children. We thought we were expanding our family, adding new branches to our tree. But Chloe and Bradley did not want to be branches on our tree. They wanted to chop the whole thing down and sell it for firewood. When my beloved Calvin passed away 3 years ago after a sudden heart attack, my entire universe collapsed. I lost my anchor, my best friend, and the only person who truly understood the journey we had walked together. In those early, suffocating days of grief, I desperately needed the comfort of the children we had raised with such devotion. I thought Jamal and Tasha would naturally step up to check on their grieving mother. But the reality was a bitter pill to swallow. The daily phone calls stopped. The spontaneous weekend visits vanished. The silence in my big empty house became a heavy weight on my chest. Months would go by without a single word from them. When the phone finally did ring, it was never to ask how I was coping with the crushing loneliness. It was always a financial request. Jamal would call to ask if I could float him a quick loan to cover a lavish vacation to Greece, claiming his corporate bonus was delayed. Tasha would text me out of the blue, asking if I could tap into my retirement savings to help her put a down payment on a new investment property. They treated me like a silent bank that required no emotional maintenance. I would sit alone at night drinking tea from my favorite mug, staring at the empty chair where Calvin used to read his evening paper. I would ask his spirit where we went wrong. How did our beautiful, smart children turn into such cold, calculating adults? We taught them the value of hard work, but somehow they only learned the value of $1. They allowed their spouses to disrespect the very foundation of their upbringing without ever stepping in to defend me. And when they actually bothered to visit, the disrespect they brought into my home was unbearable. Chloe made it her personal mission to insult everything I cherished. She would walk into my living room, sigh loudly, and run her manicured fingers over the solid oak dining table Calvin and I had saved up for months to buy. She would tell Jamal right in front of me that the house felt terribly outdated and that my vintage furniture belonged in a dumpster. She constantly offered to redesign my space to make it look less depressing, completely disregarding that every item in my house held a precious memory of my husband. Bradley was even worse, though his insults were masked as financial curiosity. My neighborhood, which had been ignored by developers for decades, was suddenly in the middle of a massive gentrification boom. Trendy coffee shops and expensive boutiques were popping up on every corner. Bradley would pace the length of my sunroom, looking out the window with greedy eyes. He would constantly ask me exactly how much I was paying in property taxes and marvel at the soaring property values in the area. He would say things like, "You are sitting on a gold mine here, Loretta. It is such a shame to let all this prime equity go to waste on just one person." He looked at my sacred home, not as a place where his wife grew up, but as an underperforming asset that he could not wait to liquidate. It was sickening. They did not see a grieving widow trying to hold on to the last pieces of her beautiful life. They saw a tired, elderly black woman standing between them and a massive payday. I tried so hard to brush off their comments, convincing myself that it was just the modern way young people talked about real estate and design. I swallowed my pride time and time again, desperately hoping that the sweet children I raised would eventually find their way back to me. I was willing to endure Chloe's snide remarks and Bradley's invasive interrogations just to get a glimpse of Jamal and Tasha, but my patience only emboldened them. I spent 3 entire days on my feet, preparing for Thanksgiving dinner. My kitchen was a symphony of sounds and smells, exactly the way it used to be when Calvin was alive. I carefully rubbed the smoked turkey with my special blend of spices. I baked 3 sweet potato pies from scratch, rolling out the dough until my hands ached. I simmered a huge pot of collard greens with smoked turkey tails, and layered 3 different types of sharp cheddar into my baked macaroni and cheese. My back throbbed and my joints were stiff, but my heart was full. I pulled out my best china, the set Calvin bought me for our 20th anniversary, and polished every single silver fork. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for my children. I wanted them to feel the warmth of the home they grew up in. I wanted us to be a family again. But the moment the doorbell rang, that foolish illusion shattered. Jamal, Chloe. Tasha and Bradley walked through my front door completely empty-handed. Not a single bottle of sparkling cider, not a side dish, not even a cheap bouquet of flowers from the grocery store. Jamal barely offered me a stiff hug before tossing his heavy winter coat directly into my arms, as if I were the coat-check girl at one of his fancy downtown clubs. Tasha brushed past my cheek with a quick kiss, immediately complaining about the terrible traffic. Chloe strutted into my hallway, wrapped in an oversized designer scarf, and dramatically shivered. She rubbed her arms and announced that my house was terribly drafty, loudly suggesting that my original hardwood floors made the space feel like a cluttered, outdated museum. Bradley did not even bother to greet me. He just walked straight into the living room, dropped onto my velvet sofa, and shouted toward the kitchen, demanding I bring him a glass of bourbon with 2 cubes of ice. I stood there in my own foyer, holding their heavy coats, staring at the beautiful dining table I had spent hours setting. I felt the heat of humiliation rise in my chest. I was not their mother or their host. I was the hired help. When we finally sat down to eat, I tried to bow my head and offer a prayer of gratitude. I wanted to thank God for our health and for bringing us together. But before I could even finish my first sentence, Bradley loudly interrupted me to ask Jamal about a new cryptocurrency investment. Just like that, the prayer was over. The feast I had spent days cooking was shoveled onto their plates without a single word of thanks. Instead of asking how my health was or how I was enjoying my retirement, they talked completely over me. They shouted across the table about their lavish trips, their expensive car leases, and the luxury watches they wanted to buy for Christmas. But underneath all that loud bragging, I heard the sheer desperation in their voices. Jamal bitterly complained about his maxed-out platinum credit cards, blaming the economy for his massive personal debts. Tasha practically whined about her real estate firm, threatening to cut her commission if she did not close a major deal by the end of the year. Bradley proudly bragged that they just needed a quick cash injection to stay afloat, while Chloe complained that she could not afford to renovate her kitchen because all their money was tied up in bad investments. They were drowning in debt, living far beyond their means, and trying desperately to impress people who did not even care about them. I sat at the head of my own table, surrounded by the incredible food I had cooked with my own 2 hands, completely invisible. I tried to share a story about a former student of mine who had just opened a local business down the street, but Chloe simply rolled her eyes and started talking to Tasha about an upcoming designer handbag sale. I was a ghost in my own dining room. I looked at Jamal and Tasha, laughing loudly at a tasteless joke Bradley made, and a cold, sharp realization pierced my soul. They did not come here to see me. They came here to eat my food, drink my liquor, and use my home as a backdrop for their arrogant complaints. I slowly put my fork down. The delicious sweet potato pie tasted like dry ash in my mouth. I had sacrificed my entire youth so these two children could sit at the table of success. And this was exactly how they repaid me. Their disrespect was not just thoughtless, it was a cold, calculated dismissal of my entire worth. I needed a moment to breathe. The heavy, suffocating air in the dining room was making my chest tight, so I quietly excused myself to fetch the dessert plates from the walk-in pantry. Calvin had built that pantry himself, expanding it right up against the back wall of our enclosed sunroom. It was my favorite spot in the house, smelling faintly of cinnamon, dried herbs, and old wood, sir. But there was a quirk about that pantry Calvin and I always used to joke about. The drywall separating it from the sunroom was notoriously thin. If you stood by the flower bins, you could hear every single whisper from the sunroom as if the person was standing right next to you. I reached up for my good crystal dessert plates, the ones with the gold trim. I heard the sliding glass door of the sunroom click shut. Footsteps shuffled on the tile. It was the four of them. They had slipped away from the table, leaving me alone with the dirty dishes to have a private meeting. I froze my hand, hovering over the crystal. I did not intend to eavesdrop, but Bradley's voice cut through the drywall, sharp and eager, commanding the room. "Look, we cannot keep waiting around," Bradley was saying, pacing the floor. "This neighborhood is gentrifying faster than anywhere else in the city. I talked to my guys at the firm. The lot alone is worth $1.2 million to developers. If we get her into a cheap state-run facility, we split the cash 4 ways. It is a clean, simple payout." My stomach dropped to the floor. Did I just hear that correctly? $1.2 million, a state-run facility, split the cash 4 ways. The words circled my brain like vultures. Then Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with that same fake sweetness she used when insulting my furniture. "Bradley is right, guys," she said. "We are drowning here. Jamal's credit cards are completely maxed out, and my business is barely breaking even. Your mother is sitting on a fortune in equity, just wasting it on a house that is entirely too big for one person. She does not need all this space. She needs supervised care, and we need the capital." I leaned against the pantry shelves, clutching a dessert plate to my chest, as if it could protect my heart from breaking. I expected my children to defend me. I waited for Jamal to put his foot down, to tell his wife and brother-in-law to show some respect for the woman who gave them everything. I waited for Tasha to remind them that this was my home, built on my sweat and their father's sacrifices. Instead, it was Tasha who spoke next. I know, my daughter said, her voice completely devoid of any emotion or guilt. "I actually went ahead and printed out the power of attorney papers yesterday. I have them in my purse right now. I also brought a brochure for Shady Pines. It is a state-funded nursing home on the outskirts of the county. It is not exactly luxurious, but it is cheap, which means more money left over from the sale for us. A state-funded nursing home. The kind of place where elderly folks are left in crowded rooms, forgotten by the world, smelling of bleach and despair. My own daughter had brought the paperwork to my Thanksgiving dinner. Then came the final devastating blow. Jamal, my firstborn, the boy who used to hold my hand when crossing the street, chuckled softly. "It is perfect," Jamal said, his voice cold and calculating. "She is getting forgetful anyway. We will just tell the doctors she is losing her mind. She is too old to fight us. We present a united front, say she is a danger to herself, and the state will hand over control of the estate before Christmas." I stood in the darkness of the pantry, entirely paralyzed. My own children, the babies I had nursed, the adults I had practically bankrupted myself to put through college, were actively plotting to lock me away in a miserable institution just to steal my home and pay off their debts. They were going to strip away my dignity, gaslight medical professionals into thinking I was senile, and throw me out like yesterday's garbage. They honestly believed I was just a frail, helpless old widow who would simply bow her head and let them take everything I had built. A cold, fierce energy began to replace the sorrow in my heart. My tears dried up instantly. I carefully placed the crystal plate back on the shelf. I smoothed down my dress and took a deep, steadying breath. They thought I was too old to fight. They thought I was losing my mind. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I stepped out of the pantry, my face a mask of perfect, unbreakable calm, ready to serve them their pie. I stepped out of the shadows of the pantry and walked back into the dining room. My hands were shaking, not from age or physical frailty, but from the sheer, unadulterated rage bubbling up inside my chest. I carried the sweet potato pies, the ones I had baked, with the very hands that once rocked Jamal and Tasha to sleep, and set them down heavily on the center of the table. My expression must have been carved from solid stone, because the loud, arrogant chatter in the room instantly died down. I picked up the serving knife, sliced the pie, and handed out the china plates in absolute silence. They ate greedily, completely oblivious to the invisible storm gathering right across from them. I sat at the head of the table and watched them chew, my heart pounding a steady, painful rhythm. Every single bite they took felt like a direct mockery of the 40 years of sacrifice Calvin and I had poured into their ungrateful lives. They had already divided up my home in their minds, tossing my future aside like a broken appliance that was no longer of any use to them. As the last empty dessert plates were pushed away, Jamal cleared his throat in that important corporate way of his. He reached into the inside pocket of his expensive custom suit jacket and pulled out a glossy, tri-folded piece of paper. Without having the basic decency to look me in the eye, he slid it across the smooth oak table. It stopped right in front of my folded hands. I looked down at the glossy print. It was a brochure for Shady Pines Assisted Living. I knew that place very well from my days working in the city school district. It was a miserable, run-down state-funded facility where neglected elderly folks were sent to waste away when their families simply did not want to deal with them anymore. The very sight of the cheap pamphlet made my blood run cold. Before I could even find the words to speak, Chloe leaned forward across the table. She placed her manicured hand directly over mine. Her voice dripped with a fake, sickly sweet syrup that made my stomach turn over in absolute disgust. She tilted her head in feigned sympathy and said, "Loretta, we have all been talking and we are just so incredibly worried about you living in this big, drafty house all by yourself. We found this lovely facility just outside the county lines. It has round-the-clock care, and it is really for your own safety. We just cannot bear the thought of you getting hurt, or forgetting to turn off the stove, or wandering off into the neighborhood. It is the best thing for everyone." I pulled my hand out from under hers as if her touch had physically burned my skin. I looked desperately at Jamal, waiting for my son, my firstborn child, to stop this madness and defend his mother. But he just stared down at his empty plate, completely spineless. Then Tasha reached into her oversized designer handbag. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and dropped them right on top of the nursing home brochure. The heavy, insulting thud of the paper hitting the wood echoed loudly in the quiet room. She handed me a cheap plastic pen with a forced, practiced smile that she likely used to close real estate deals. "Mom, we are doing this because we love you," she said, her tone utterly devoid of any real human affection. "These are just standard power of attorney papers. Sign it right now and we will handle the house for you. You will not have to worry about a single thing. We will take care of the sale pay for your new room at Shady Pines and make sure you are comfortable in your final years. We are trying to make this easy for you, so please do not be difficult." I looked down at the dense legal papers, then at the cheap brochure, and finally at the faces of the people I had given my entire life to. I felt a cold, hard clarity wash over my mind, sharpening my focus. I stood up from my chair, towering over them, and pushed the papers firmly back across the table. "I will not be signing a single thing," I said, my voice steady low and echoing with absolute finality. "I am in perfect health. My mind is sharper than it has ever been, and this house belongs to me. Now all of you need to get your coats and get out of my house immediately." Tasha gasped, feigning extreme outrage, while Jamal stood up, his face flushing dark with anger. But it was Bradley who stepped forward. He crossed his arms over his chest, a nasty, arrogant sneer twisting his features. He looked at me not as a mother-in-law, but as a stubborn squatter standing in the way of his massive payday. "You are not thinking clearly, Loretta," he said, his voice dropping into a menacing, highly threatening register. "We are giving you a choice right now, but that generous offer expires. You have exactly until Christmas to pack your bags and move into that facility voluntarily. Otherwise, we are calling Adult Protective Services first thing after the holidays to declare you legally incompetent. We will tell the doctors you are a danger to yourself and the state will force you out. Do not make this ugly, Loretta." I did not shed a single tear that night after they finally walked out of my front door. The profound sadness that had threatened to drown me just hours earlier had completely evaporated. In its place, a cold, righteous fury settled deep into my bones. I walked slowly through my quiet living room, looking at the framed photographs lining the mantel. I looked at Jamal in his little league uniform and Tasha in her ballet tutu. The sweet, respectful children Calvin and I had poured our absolute souls into raising were truly dead and gone. I had to face the brutal reality that I had raised two entitled, greedy monsters who saw my life as nothing more than a stepping stone for their own selfish desires. They thought my grief made me weak. They thought my age made me stupid. They thought they had cornered a helpless old widow, but they completely forgot who they were dealing with. I was a woman who spent 40 years managing a chaotic inner-city high school. I survived budget cuts, gang violence, and impossible bureaucracies. I was not about to let two spoiled brats and their arrogant spouses steal the legacy my husband and I built with our bare hands. The very next morning, I woke up at 5 o'clock, drank my black coffee, and got straight to work. My first phone call was to Arthur Harrison. Arthur was Calvin's oldest friend and one of the sharpest estate lawyers in the state. He had helped us draft our original wills years ago, and he knew exactly how much Calvin loved this house. When I arrived at his downtown office, I did not just bring my suspicions. I brought hard, undeniable evidence. Calvin had always been a man who valued security. Before he passed away, he installed a comprehensive network of discreet, high-definition security cameras throughout the ground floor of our home. He wanted to make sure I was safe when he was not around. Those cameras captured both audio and video perfectly. I sat across the heavy mahogany desk from Arthur and handed him a secure flash drive. We sat in silence as I played the footage from the previous evening. Arthur watched the screen as Bradley confidently outlined his plan to sell my lot to developers for over $1 million. He listened as Chloe complained about her failing business, and Jamal enthusiastically agreed to gaslight medical professionals into thinking I was losing my mind. The room grew incredibly tense as Tasha proudly admitted she had drawn up power of attorney papers and brought a brochure for a substandard state-run nursing home. When the footage ended, Arthur slowly took off his reading glasses. His face was flushed with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute outrage. He looked at me and said, "Loretta, I have practiced law for over 30 years, and this is one of the most despicable displays of elder financial abuse I have ever witnessed." I asked him what our immediate next steps were. Arthur moved with rapid precision. First, he scheduled a comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation for me that very same afternoon with a highly respected independent geriatric psychiatrist. I spent 3 hours answering questions, solving puzzles, and discussing my financial independence. By the end of the day, I had a certified, legally binding medical document declaring that I was in perfect mental health, competent, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. That document was an impenetrable shield. Next, Arthur helped me draw up legal injunctions that completely blocked any future attempts my children might make to claim guardianship. If they even tried to file a petition in family court, the judge would immediately see the preemptive medical clearance and the video evidence of their malicious conspiracy. We legally barricaded every single door they thought they could use to lock me away. I left Arthur's office that evening feeling a profound sense of empowerment. The heavy burden of betrayal had been replaced by the sharp, thrilling adrenaline of a woman taking back her own life. My children had given me an ultimatum. They gave me until Christmas to pack my bags and surrender my home. I decided I was going to meet their deadline, but I was going to do it on my exact terms. I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity and purpose. The battle lines were permanently and decisively drawn right there in the sand. They thought they were the predators in this scenario, but they were absolutely mistaken. I was already 10 full calculated steps ahead of them. Bradley thought he was a genius for figuring out the skyrocketing value of my property, but he severely underestimated my own intelligence. I had watched my historic neighborhood rapidly change over the last 10 eventful years. I saw the aggressive developers slowly creeping in, buying up all the old houses and mercilessly tearing them down to build giant luxury condominiums. There was one specific commercial developer, a man named Marcus Vance, who had been aggressively trying to buy my lot for the past 3 years. Marcus was known throughout the city as a high-end, ruthless businessman who always got exactly what he wanted. He had sent me dozens of letters and knocked on my door multiple times offering to buy me out. I had always politely refused, telling him that my house was not for sale at any price. But my present circumstances had drastically changed overnight. I found his glossy business card in my kitchen drawer and dialed his direct line. Marcus answered his phone on the very second ring. I told him I was finally ready to sell, but that my property came with very specific conditions. We met at my dining table the very next morning. Marcus arrived wearing an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase and an eager smile. I did not offer him coffee or pleasantries. I slid a piece of paper across the table detailing exactly what I wanted. I firmly demanded an all-cash expedited sale for exactly $1.8 million. This was significantly above the current market value, but I knew my lot was the critical anchor piece he needed to complete his massive luxury condo project on my block. Marcus initially balked at the astronomical price, but I held my ground with absolute confidence. I told him he had exactly 24 hours to accept my terms, or I would call his biggest rival across town and offer them the lot instead. I also demanded a strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreement. No one in the public, and especially no one in my family, could know about this transaction until after I had fully vacated the premises. The final condition was a 30-day leaseback clause. I needed to remain in the house legally and undisturbed until the week of Christmas. Marcus sat back in his chair, studying me with a newfound respect. He recognized a woman who knew her exact worth. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket and agreed to every single condition. The paperwork was drafted overnight, and the massive sum of $1.8 million was wired directly into a brand new private bank account that only Arthur and I knew about. The deal was officially done. The house was successfully sold. Bradley and Tasha thought they could manipulate the system to get $1 million for my home, but I had just secured nearly double that amount in pure, untraceable cash. I walked through the empty sunroom, looking out at the beautiful garden Calvin and I had planted so many years ago. I knew this house would soon be demolished to make way for modern glass structures, but I felt absolutely no sorrow. A home is truly only a safe sanctuary when it is completely filled with unconditional love and mutual respect. My own ungrateful children had completely poisoned this sacred space with their endless toxic greed. Selling the house was the most liberating decision I had ever made in my life. The cash was safely secured away from their grasping hands. They truly thought they were incredibly smart, secretly plotting behind my back. But I had flawlessly executed the absolute ultimate masterstroke right under their very noses. With the massive sale finalized and the money safely hidden away, I began the quiet, methodical process of erasing myself from their lives. I spent the next few weeks silently packing up the true valuables in my home. I did not care about the bulky furniture or the old appliances that Chloe so deeply despised. I carefully and meticulously boxed up all the irreplaceable family heirlooms. I wrapped my grandmother's vintage jewelry, my wedding china, and every single photograph that held a cherished memory. I packed Calvin's favorite books, his old transit authority jackets, and the beautiful wooden clocks he used to carve in the garage. I rented a secure climate-controlled storage unit across town and slowly moved these precious pieces of my history out of the house. Jamal and Tasha never noticed a thing because they never bothered to call or visit. While I was packing my belongings, I also made sure to pack up their financial futures. I sat down with Arthur Harrison one last time to completely rewrite my last will and testament. My new fortune of nearly $2 million needed a meaningful purpose. I legally directed every single cent of my estate to be placed into a newly established scholarship fund for underprivileged black youth in the old school district where I used to work. I wanted my money to help kids who actually appreciated the value of hard work and sacrifice. Kids who would use the opportunity to build a better world rather than exploit their own families. As for Jamal and Tasha, I made sure they could never challenge my decisions in probate court. Arthur advised me that leaving them completely out of the will might give them grounds to claim I simply forgot about them or was not of sound mind. So I left them exactly $1 each. It was a perfectly legal, deeply insulting gesture that clearly communicated my absolute lucid intent. They wanted an inheritance, and they were going to get exactly 100 pennies. With my legal affairs completely bulletproof, I turned my attention to my own future. I had always dreamed of living near the ocean, a dream Calvin and I shared, but never got to fulfill. I contacted a real estate agent in South Carolina and purchased a beautiful, sunlit beachfront condominium. I proudly paid for it entirely in cash. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound balcony, and a direct view of the crashing waves. It was the perfect, peaceful sanctuary for my new life. I booked a first-class one-way flight for the 23rd of December. I arranged for professional movers to transport my storage unit down to South Carolina shortly after the new year. Everything was perfectly aligned. I spent my final days in the empty, echoing house feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy chains of maternal guilt and disappointment had been completely severed. I was no longer a victim waiting for the slaughter. I was a truly free, wealthy woman, confidently walking toward a bright, beautiful horizon. The trap they had so carefully laid for me had been completely dismantled and discarded. I smiled as I packed my final suitcase, placing my plane ticket safely inside my purse. The holiday season was rapidly approaching, and my greedy children were eagerly anticipating their cruel, hollow victory. They thought they were about to inherit an absolute fortune and force me into a miserable facility. They were definitely in for the absolute biggest shock of a lifetime. The days before Christmas Eve were a blur of calculated efficiency. The house once filled with 40 years of memories, the scent of Calvin's cologne, and the echoes of laughter was now completely bare. I had shipped everything that mattered down south and sent the rest to charity. All that remained in the living room was a single folding chair and my suitcases sitting neatly by the door. The hardwood floors amplified every sound. It was the afternoon of Christmas Eve. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. It looked like a holiday greeting card, masking the ugly greed that was about to walk up my steps. Right on schedule, a sleek luxury vehicle pulled into my snowy driveway. I watched through the bare front window as the four of them climbed out. Jamal, Tasha, Chloe, and Bradley. They were not carrying wrapped gifts or festive holiday dishes. Instead, they were carrying flat, broken-down moving boxes and thick manila folders. Behind them walked a stranger, a nervous-looking woman holding a leather briefcase. They had actually brought a mobile notary on Christmas Eve. The sheer audacity of trying to force your mother out of her home on a holy holiday solidified every decision I had made. I felt no sorrow, no hesitation. My heart was completely shielded in armor. The front door swung open. Jamal had used his spare key. He stepped into the foyer, shaking the snow off his expensive wool coat, and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes scanned the empty, echoing house. The velvet sofa, the dining table, the grandfather clock, all of it was gone. The four of them stood in the doorway, staring at the barren walls and the faint outlines where pictures used to hang. Then they saw me. I was sitting peacefully on my folding chair in the middle of the empty living room, sipping tea from a paper cup. I wore my heavy winter coat, a stylish, wide-brimmed hat, and leather gloves. I was entirely ready to leave. Jamal broke the silence. A smug, victorious smirk spread across his face as he took in the sight of my packed suitcases. He misread the situation, assuming my empty house was a sign of surrender. Well, I have to say, I am pleasantly surprised, Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension as he walked toward me. I am genuinely glad you finally came to your senses, Mom. It is better that you packed up the junk before we had to do it. We brought a few boxes for your clothes, and the notary is here to finalize the power of attorney and the transfer of the deed. We can have you checked into the facility by dinner time. It will be a nice, quiet Christmas for you. Tasha stepped forward, crossing her arms, looking around with a greedy gleam in her eyes. It is going to take a lot of work to clean this place up for the market. She noted, already calculating her unearned commission. Bradley nodded eagerly, practically salivating at the bare floors. But the lot value is pristine, he added, turning to his wife. We can start entertaining bids from developers the second the new year begins. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The warm liquid coated my throat. I looked at the four of them, letting the silence stretch out until they started shifting uncomfortably on their feet. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I stood up, my posture perfectly straight, my head held high. I did not shake or waver. I walked right up to Jamal and pressed the envelope firmly against his chest until his hands reflexively came up to take it. Open it! I commanded, my voice echoing loudly off the empty walls. Jamal frowned, exchanging a confused glance with his wife. He ripped open the seal and pulled out the thick stack of stapled papers. Tasha, Chloe, and Bradley crowded around his shoulders, their eyes scanning the bold legal print. I watched the exact moment the realization hit them. I watched the smug, arrogant smirks melt away, replaced by absolute, unfiltered horror. The color drained from Jamal's face so fast he looked physically ill. The document in his trembling hands was not a deed waiting to be transferred to them. It was a finalized, legally binding, fully executed bill of sale. What is this? Tasha shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical squeak. You sold the house. But the true devastation came from Bradley. He snatched the papers out of Jamal's hands, his eyes widening in pure panic as he read the name of the purchasing entity. No, he stammered, stepping backward as if the paper had burned his fingers. This is Vance Commercial Development. That is my firm. That is the exact corporate developer I have been courting for this lot. I looked them dead in the eye, savoring the absolute destruction of their greedy little plot. I took your advice, I said, my voice cutting through the chilly air like a blade. I sold the house. I sold it directly to the very people you planned to sell it to. But I bypassed your little scheme entirely. I got $1.8 million in pure cash. But the money is mine, and you will never see a single dime of it. The panic erupted instantly. The notary quietly slipped out the front door, leaving my children to face the ruin they brought upon themselves. Bradley began pacing the floor frantically. "You do not understand what you have done," he yelled. "If Vance Development bought this lot outright, they are not going to sit on it. They move fast. They will be bulldozing this entire property in 48 hours. I was supposed to be the broker on this deal. They are going to fire me." Tasha ignored her husband's career crisis. Tasha lunged forward, her face twisted in a desperate snarl. "What about my inheritance?" she screamed. "You cannot just take $1 million and walk away. Half of that money belongs to me. I am your daughter. You owe us that money." "You are not a daughter," I replied coldly. "You are a parasite." Chloe collapsed onto her knees, bursting into messy tears. Jamal grabbed his head. "Mum, you have to undo this." He begged, his arrogance entirely shattered. Chloe and I took out a massive second mortgage on our house. We maxed out our credit lines because we were anticipating the windfall from this sale. If we do not get that cash by January, the bank is going to foreclose on our home. We will be completely bankrupt. I looked down at them, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of justice. "You gambled with my life, Jamal," I said softly. "And you lost everything." A heavy knock rattled the open door. A burly man stepped into the foyer. It was the demolition crew foreman, a man named Big Mike, whom I had met during the final inspections. He had a deep respect for me, having listened to the stories of how Calvin and I built this home. He looked around the room, taking in the crying women and the panicked men. "Excuse me, Miss Loretta," the foreman said in a booming, gravelly voice. "My crew is parked down the street. We are here to do the final walkthrough and secure the perimeter. The heavy machinery rolls in tomorrow morning." I smiled at him. "I am all finished here, Mike," I said. "But it seems these unauthorized individuals are refusing to leave the premises." The foreman's expression darkened. He cracked his large knuckles and took a step toward Jamal and Bradley. "You heard the lady." He growled, his massive frame towering over my pathetic son and son-in-law. "This is private commercial property now. You have exactly 10 seconds to get off this lot before I have my crew physically throw you out for trespassing. Move it now." Bradley and Jamal scrambled backward, their courage completely evaporating in the face of the burly foreman. They grabbed their weeping wives by the arms, dragging them toward the door. They stumbled out onto the snowy front porch, screaming accusations at each other. Tasha slapped Bradley's chest, blaming him for the failed scheme, while Jamal screamed at Chloe about their crippling debt. I picked up my suitcases. Mike took them and escorted me out, locking it firmly behind us. A sleek black town car was waiting for me at the curb. I settled into the luxurious leather-back seat, feeling the warmth of the heater. I lowered the tinted window just a fraction. I watched my children standing on the freezing, snowy sidewalk, shivering in the cold, viciously turning on each other as the devastating reality of their absolute financial ruin finally set in. I rolled the window up, smiled at the driver, and told him to take me to the airport. Fast forward a few months, and my new life has blossomed into a beautiful paradise. I am thriving in sunny Florida, far away from the bitter cold and the toxic greed of my past. The harsh winters are just a distant memory, replaced by the warm, salty breeze of the ocean. Every single morning I wake up early and take a long, quiet walk barefoot along the pristine, white sand beach, watching the waves crashing against the shore. My beautiful new beachfront condo is bathed in natural sunlight filled with my grandmother's antique jewelry and Calvin's favorite books, keeping his wonderful memory alive in the most beautiful way. I have surrounded myself with a wonderful community of genuine, loving friends. We spend our sunny afternoons playing cards, taking local art classes, and drinking colourful fruit cocktails on my wraparound balcony, as the sun gently sets over the water. We laugh loudly, share stories of our youth, and support each other without any hidden agendas or selfish motives. My cell phone still rings occasionally, but I never answer it. My voicemail inbox is constantly filled with desperate weeping messages from Jamal and Tasha. Their lives have completely unraveled. Jamal is facing a brutal bankruptcy, and Chloe filed for divorce the moment their house was officially foreclosed upon. Tasha eventually lost her job at the real estate firm, and Bradley abandoned her when their massive debts became too heavy to carry. They constantly beg for my forgiveness, pleading for just a tiny fraction of the money they tried to steal. But I simply press delete and erase every message. I finally realized that my absolute peace of mind is worth infinitely more than trying to fix broken, entitled adults. I saved myself, and I have never felt happier in my entire life. Looking back on everything I endured during those incredibly painful years, I have learned one undeniable and profound truth. Blood makes you related, but respect and loyalty make you family. I spent decades of my life pouring my absolute heart and soul into two children who only saw me as a walking bank account. I thought sacrificing my own happiness would guarantee their love and devotion. I was completely wrong. Never let anyone, not even your children, put a price tag on your dignity. If you have to pay for their love, it was never real to begin with. True love does not demand your sanity or your home in exchange for a simple holiday visit. Today, I am finally living my best life on my own terms, entirely free from their toxic, greedy grasp. If you resonated with my personal story today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I truly want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Let me know in the comments below. I promise to read every single one of your wonderful thoughts. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.